Hey, what's up, y'all? And of course, welcome to another alternative factuals video. Forgive me for last week. Like I said, I just had a lot going on. Nothing too crazy. Just, I gotta take care of things before I can give you guys my 100% energy. So I'm just going to be basically going through something that I think a lot of people don't really pay too much attention to in DC Comics when it comes to gods and magic and supernatural beings. But this is also something you've seen in the DC animated universe, Anansi the Spider. But instead of me talking about that specific hero that you saw in that Static Shock, I think it was 2 episodes that he appeared, I'm actually going to be talking about the god he gets his powers from. And that's going to be Kwaku Anansi. And before I dive into any of those details and all that good stuff and all that jazz, please be sure to like, share, and of course subscribe. Please leave your comments down below. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what you're feeling. And without further and or possible ado, let's kind of just get into it. Kwaku Anansi, the spider. Basically, he is a trickster god in West African folklore. This is, for many of you who may or may not know, this is also a very real, folklore. It's a very real, belief in terms of, the culture of Anansi. I'm pretty sure some of you have seen American Gods. You've seen that Anansi is actually something that a lot of West Africans usually would believe in when it comes to storytelling. At least back in the day. I'm not going to say currently because I really don't know. But basically, we did see in the DC animated universe that we get the Anansi superhero, but a lot of people don't know that Kwaku Anansi is responsible for a lot of, supernatural occurrences in the DC universe. He did claim he was responsible for the powers of animal-based heroes such as Animal Man and Vixen. But also what makes him interesting is that he's far more powerful than a lot of people even realize, and he doesn't really appear too often, which makes it kind of a disappointment when it comes to his character in general. But I still think this is a character that a lot of you need to kind of get to know. Now, naturally, even though he is a god, you would assume maybe he's not black or whatever like that, but in West African folklore, he is a person of color. So I'm going to include him as basically a black hero or a black villain or whatever the case may be, even though his alignment is neutral. He doesn't serve anyone in particular. He doesn't serve good or evil. He just does what he does. So let's kind of get into details. Now, if we're going by the history that we see in the Arrowverse, as well as the history that we know about when it comes to real life, they kind of fuse it in DC Comics. So basically, centuries ago, the tribes of Machanga province of Zimbezi, who we all know is basically the tribe in which Vixen derives from, invoked the power of the spider god Anansi and basically begged for him to help protect their villages, which provided them with the amulet, which allows her to tap into the red, which basically gives her the abilities of different animals all over the animal kingdom. And basically this totem had been passed down from generation to generation, and then eventually we ended up with the person who currently has it. And his powers are very interesting because he does have the ability to metamorphosize his body. Basically, he's a trickster by nature, so his power allows him to shapeshift to any form he chooses, but I think he primarily sticks to a spider-like form just due to the nature of how people perceive him in Western African culture. Also, he has telepathy and he has power distribution. So he's able to let people siphon or use his abilities or invoke his power, much like how in Marvel Comics you have Sidorak, who you have the Crimson Bands of Sidorak. You also have the Crimson Gem of Sidorak, which allows people to invoke his power or portions of his power and use it for whatever their means may be, or maybe he'll allow someone to use it because maybe he has an ulterior motive, because nonetheless he is still a trickster god. Even though he is not, in any particular alignment, he still is someone who has ulterior motives when he feels like he sees fit. Now, if we're going to go also by the real life situation, the tales of Anansi, basically he is a god of storytelling as well. So there has been some instances in DC Comics when he would basically describe how he was an enemy of the Justice League, where he basically would be able to some level warp reality, which is very interesting because the simple fact is, you think that someone who can storytell wouldn't be able to have that level of power, but he's still classified as a deity just due to the nature of his abilities and what he's capable of. But also sometimes they say storytelling, or the power of words, or the power of speaking, the power of putting words into existence can be extremely powerful. And that's a part of a saying that did actually in some way, shapes, or form kind of derive from Western African culture. The power of your words, what you say to people, what you say out loud, what you say and believe can manifest in reality if you will it to be so. And I think he is one of those physical or non-physical manifestations of that, simply because he is the god of storytelling. So everything he's said, everything he's told in terms of what he's capable of can to some degree warp reality. And we don't know the totality of his power when it comes to reality warping. We don't know the totality of his power in terms of what he's capable of doing at 100%, or maybe in his dimension, or maybe in his absolute true form. We don't know what he's capable of. All we know is based on the folklore, based on some minor things that we've seen, and also the powers that people are able to invoke from him. And depending on the totality in which they're able to invoke it, he can be extremely powerful and he can be extremely deadly. And we have never seen the upper limits of his abilities, and I don't think we're going to be seeing his abilities anytime soon. But this is something that we need to explore when it comes to Kwaku Anansi. He is still very much a very powerful deity, and he is scary in terms of he doesn't have an alignment. He does not, serve, an evil motive, or he does not serve a good motive, even though his pictures can be a little like 50-50. Sometimes he can look a little nice, sometimes he can look a little evil, but also it just seems a little off. Now, I'm pretty sure some of you are going to bring up the fact that there is an Anansa, which is, I think she's not a deity by nature. I think she's a person who just took up that persona of being like, a female version of Anansi. So I'm not going to really dive too deep into that one. But this is only a person who actually was the enemy of Animal Man, who, like I previously said, his powers derived from Anansi. And she made her first appearance in Animal Man number 81 of March 1995. And her main alias was, Spider Queen, and her alignment was bad. But besides that, not too much was really known about her, so not really too much detail we can get into. But besides that, yes, Anansi, Kwaku Anansi. I want to dive into a little bit of the real world aspects of, the stories and the most popular stories about Anansi. A very interesting fact about Kwaku Anansi was the fact that a lot of the times, even when you hear a lot of the folklore and the stories about himself, the one thing that DC kind of changed about him is they made it seem like, at least in the real world, according to the folklore, he was very possessive of all stories, no matter where it came from. He was the god of storytelling. And a lot of people study this literature, and then they kind of come to this conclusion that, his stories obviously were parables and, telling life lessons and how to avoid certain situations, the typical stuff that even some aspects of the Bible may contain. But what's interesting about the whole, the aspect of Anansi himself is that some people speculate that the god was heavily, at least more evil than some of the stories may, kind of suggest, just due to the nature of oral tradition and the nostalgia factor, because a lot of these stories, according to folklore, were told by Anansi to be passed down by different tribes. And this is where the stories kind of get a little, I guess, clouded, because in theory it's supposed to be told by him, which means he has a biased opinion about it. So this is what makes, Anansi very interesting. He's definitely a multi-level, when it comes to the level of layers he has as a person, as a deity, as a god. Even in his stories, it's not so black and white, because you cannot be a trickster god and then all your stories seem to be putting you in this light where it seems like you have a really good motive or a decent motivation to do some of the things that you do without any kind of being aggravated directly. So it's a little weird. Don't get me wrong, if you read a couple of these stories, it's very interesting. A lot of them I can tell are just meant for you to think, kind of digest, and kind of see and basically compare it to real life. But besides that, that's pretty much all they are. It's just stories and folklore. But I can tell that DC Comics took this concept and then basically took in consideration how people studied the literature of these stories and these folklores, and the concept of Anansi being a storyteller, and then kind of use a little bit of it to kind of basically say maybe he's not really completely telling these stories just for the sake of telling these stories. Maybe he's changing events to work in certain people's favors, or maybe in his favor, in order for the stories to kind of move forward the way that they did according to the folklore. So that's what makes it very interesting. So the storytelling aspect could just be a manifestation of one of his abilities, where either he's reality warping or manipulating odds in someone's favor, or a combination of both, which can actually show or kind of give a reasonable explanation on why certain events played out the way that they did in history when Anansi is involved. And even the DCAU version of Anansi the Spider, the superhero, He had abilities to stick to walls and basically cast illusions, but there has been moments in DC Comics where if illusions become powerful enough, they're fueled by something tangible, like emotions or feelings or very evil intent. You know, they can actually transform and become a reality. So it's very hard, you know, to determine, you know, the totality of his power, because yes, he's storytelling, and yes, he's able to do a lot of these things. And even according to the folklore and the people who study the folklore, it's very possible that he could have been far more powerful or far more malevolent than people really gave him credit for, but there's no way to truly know that. But let me know what you think about this video, and I'm sorry if it seems like, you know, I'm a little off. I'm just a little tired, but please be sure to like, share, and of course subscribe, and leave your comments down below. And I hope to see you later on. Peace out.